More.
We are recording.
Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us today for the International Education Week kickoff. I put a link to the International Education Week website here, and so anyone who participates today will send you the follow-up for these materials. But this is really a week-long celebration sponsored by the Department of State and the Department of Education to look at all of the benefits of international educational exchange. And so Peter and I are here today to really highlight what we do at Oglethorpe and think about ways that we can connect with students and each other around global learning. So with that, we're hoping to do quick introductions, talk a little bit about international education key facts, because who knows what you know, but we'd love to be able to share a little bit with you that's new. Talk a little bit about what global learning is, and then also have a little conversation really about what it is you do to support global learning and how Global Ed at Oglethorpe can support you in that effort. So with that, thank you for introducing yourself and those in the audience. I want to take a quick minute to tell my story and a little bit about why I'm in this field and what I do here at Oglethorpe. I grew up in a very rural community where I never envisioned, much beyond that little space that I lived, about 1,500 people in the community I lived, and dreamed of studying abroad through photos, through exchange students in my high school, through all of those things, and never necessarily saw it within my reach, but always dreamed that it would happen. And so when I went to college, at the time, the study abroad was really quite limited. I felt really grateful that the institution I attended had a consortium of schools or universities. And so I was able to study abroad in Venezuela. First time I had ever lived in a place, a city, a place that had that many people, public transportation systems, and I took full advantage of that opportunity. I also feel really lucky to have been there during the time of the elections. I was there when Chavez was elected. So it was a really fascinating time to be there and to be in a location that had, so much going on. And that really influenced me, that period of time being abroad influenced me in so many ways and, put me 20 plus years later where I am today supporting students that study abroad and international students that come to the US. So I'm just really excited to be here and to talk with you today and get to know you a little bit more.
And I'm Peter, and kind of in a similar way, some travel early on, I think, influenced my life in a big way. That when I was an undergrad, I'm from Georgia, and I got my undergrad at Kennesaw State, and I never knew if I could study abroad or if that was even an option. But then I found a trip to Chiapas, Mexico over a summer. It was a Spanish language immersion course. Wonderful experience. I stayed with a host family. I met some lifelong friends, just kind of got the travel itch. And it really influenced a lot of my life because I went to, my background's in English as a second language instruction. So I've taught English and a tiny bit of Spanish, but I lived in Spain for a while. I lived in Korea for 2 years, and I've taught at all kinds of places around Atlanta. And most recently, I was working for a company called Study Group that partnered with Oglethorpe to offer language and cultural kind of help international students acclimate on campus at Oglethorpe. And unfortunately that partnership ended, but I've been working officially as an Oglethorpe employee since this summer. And it's been really great. I'm working in global ed, and Merce and I are getting to work with our international students. We work with a lot of our DACA and undocumented students and do all kinds of things immigration related on campus, and get to talk to our study abroad students too. So kind of involved in all kinds of interesting things on campus, and I'm really excited to come back and physically be on campus. But for now, it's really great.
Yeah. So the mission in global ed, and I'll be honest, we really are in a period of transformation as a university. So as the strategic plan at Oglethorpe comes together in the next academic year, I envision this really being a little bit more specific, and for us to be able to point to very specific strategic initiatives. But overall, I've spent the last 2 years at Oglethorpe trying to promote and foster curiosity for global learning. So exploring what the world has to offer, developing intercultural skills, and as much as possible, expanding the reach of what an Oglethorpe education, what that means, connecting students to the world beyond the gates at Oglethorpe. So we do a wide range of programs, activities. A lot of our time is spent advising. And as Peter said, we work with international students, the Dream US scholars, as well as students interested in study abroad or global learning more generally. We help students adjust. That's a lot of what we do at the beginning of each semester. International students, as well as students returning from their study abroad. We help individuals connect to programs or resources on campus that are really going to, again, expand or extend that global learning. So a big part of the work that we do is connections, and then managing some of the things that happen with study abroad and international. There's a lot of bureaucratic aspects to supporting international students when it comes to the legal environment. There's a lot of bureaucratic things that come with supporting study abroad students when it comes to transfer of credits or partnerships and relationships with those international partners or study abroad providers. And so we're working together to do all of those things. And again, not lose sight of the beauty of opening up someone's mind to what the world can offer. So today is the day that the Institute for International Education releases annual open doors data. So I'm just going to highlight a few things in our conversation today. The data for study abroad is really associated with the academic year 2018. We're a full year behind just because of the cycles of study abroad. So I just want to mention that this is data from the academic year 2018-19. And there are just under 350,000 US students. IIE does only record US permanent residents and citizens who have studied abroad during that year. And that is an increase, and there has been a steady and slow increase in study abroad participation nationwide. The overall number of study abroad is about 1 in 10 students who graduate from US higher education. And at the undergraduate level or bachelor's degree seeking students, it's really 26%. And what that emphasizes is that higher education and undergraduate education in particular really has had an increasing emphasis on the experience of study abroad as a student and how that complements the classroom learning. Not surprisingly, the top 3 locations for study abroad are for US students are Italy, the United Kingdom, and Spain. But what's really exciting is there has been massive amount of growth in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, so 3 additional continents. And highlighting Peru, South Korea, China, Ghana, and Morocco are where some of the countries that have seen some of the most growth. And so again, there may have only been 100 US students studying abroad 5-10 years ago. There's now thousands and tens of thousands of students studying abroad in these locations. And that really, the impact that can make both for the host country or the host region, depending on where the student is, as well as the student coming back and being able to share something about this part of the world that so few people in their peer set have seen or experienced. Another interesting trend is that the programs that students are studying abroad on are getting shorter. So whereas study abroad 10 years ago had a large percentage of students doing full semester or even academic year, that percentage has decreased as the percentage of short-term programs has increased. And that's, tied to, making it accessible financially. That's tied to faculty taking students on programs in Jan term or May term or over the summer. And so at this point, the highest amount of growth really is in programs that are less than 8 weeks. So what about Oglethorpe? So Oglethorpe has really been relatively consistent, both in the time that I've been here and previous to that, to send anywhere between 45 and 65 students abroad annually. And the difference really for Oglethorpe is that our students are still consistently participating in one semester programs at a much higher rate than nationally. That has a lot to do with our strong international partnerships. That has to do with some of the majors that still require study abroad, which is becoming less common, unfortunately. But we have this great partnership as well with Lead Abroad, which ensures that we have students participating in short-term programs led by Oglethorpe faculty. And then we also have faculty-led programs that are probably the shortest in duration, but really the ones that have the most potential impact for those relationships with faculty here at Oglethorpe. Our students are studying abroad at some of the same locations in the top 10. So the United Kingdom, not surprisingly, our partnership with Oxford. We have a partnership in Lille in France, and then also our exchange partner in Dortmund, Germany. So those are our 3 top locations for Oglethorpe students. And then our international student numbers. So this is again, academic year 2019, because this is the current Open Doors data year. Internationally, we have seen a massive amount in the last 10 years of growth of international students. It's actually doubled. So we've been over 1 million international students in the US since 2017. But the overall number is actually decreasing. So there has been almost a 2% drop in international student enrollment in the US, and most of that is directly related to new student enrollments dropping much more significantly. So although the overall number hasn't dropped as high, the new student enrollment is a significant drop. It still represents about 5.5% of the total US enrollment in higher education. So, and we still, as the United States, lead as being the highest number of international students in the global picture. So the United States has about 20% of the market of students who are studying internationally, which is 10% higher than the next competitor. A majority of students that are in the United States are studying in STEM fields, but that does include some business fields and fields that have technology as a fundamental aspect of the disciplinary focus. And we can't ignore that $44 billion is contributed to the economy by international students in the US. At the undergraduate level, 89% of the expenses for housing, tuition, personal expenses, books, health insurance, all of those things, that's coming from their family. Those are family contributions. So can't ignore that international students have a major economic impact in our communities, and in particular on the Oglethorpe campus. We know, we can tell, we can see when international students aren't here, both in an economic way, but also we're a small community and we notice. So international student enrollments are dropping. In 2019-20, our drop was not significant. We still have had 78 total students, which included students who were enrolled, as well as students who are on a period of OPT, the work permission after completing a degree. That represents about 6.5% of our total traditional undergraduate enrollment. And our highest population of students is nothing like the national distribution. Our highest numbers are from Venezuela, Honduras, France, China, Nigeria, and China, whereas nationally, China, India, and South Korea are the top 3 and have been for the last 15 years. And then you can see majors, not surprisingly, business and biology are at the top, both again, potentially with STEM. We have a large number of international studies majors in psychology, and liberal arts actually saw nationwide the least dip in new enrollment numbers. So students are really still interested in pursuing liberal arts degrees. So with that, we want to talk a little bit more globally. Let's talk about what is this thing, global learning.
What is global learning? This is my favorite topic to discuss, so I'm really excited we get to do this. And I put some of my favorite slides that I love to discuss on here, but I'd also, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if our participants have any input on a couple of these things, I'd love to hear it too. So next slide, please. All right, so one thing we're going to think about is global learning is not just studying abroad. I think that might be the first thing we think of, but global learning and what we're going to highlight here is it's something that can happen in your classrooms, anywhere. It can be in relationships, it can be in the books you read and the people you engage with on campus, but it is deeply linked to culture. And culture is this term that gets thrown around a lot that actually has a lot of different things to consider. We might say culture is things like, do you shake hands or do you bow when you meet someone for the first time, depending on, the country you come from or the culture you come from. And that's kind of this part up on the top, this visible culture that we can all see and acknowledge. But beyond that is kind of where some of these customs and traditions come from. Like, how do they influence our perspectives on the world? How do they influence the way that we see ourselves and see others, right? And this is what's such a fascinating thing to learn, both about the people we meet, but also about ourselves. Like, what are these assumptions that we have about what you should or shouldn't do? And the thing I wanted to think about in just a second is, how does this relate to the classroom? And I know our participants here might have some ideas, but have you thought about, as you've traveled or as you've had, students or classmates from different places, have you ever noticed any expectations that have differed, like in terms of what is the teacher supposed to do or what is the student supposed to do from country to country, culture to culture? I was just curious, no pressure, but I was curious if anyone had any observations on that.
Well, in Asia, I went to Malaysia. I just spent 8 months there, but they're very respectful to the teacher. Like, if a teacher is wrong or any way, you don't point it out. You don't speak up about anything. Like, you're very respectful. But here, like, you're more of free to voice things, I guess I would say. Yeah.
Big time. Yeah, 100% similar experience. Like, when I've taught in the US versus when I've taught in places like South Korea, yeah, there's a different role, and the respect system, or the, do you interrupt your instructor? Or, like, yes, you're encouraged to, or no, never, and some of those assumptions really play into the learning process, and like how we think about classrooms and learning itself. Okay, well, kind of in that same grain, there's a couple of great perspectives here. These are from a few articles that were really interesting. And the first one, you got a student talking kind of similarly, Savannah, to your point, is, you're not even supposed to make eye contact with an instructor in some cultures. It's like, it's disrespectful, or, that idea of what is respectful and disrespectful. And I think probably at Oglethorpe, in a case like this, and it's really important to note too, there's not really a right and a wrong with this discussion, but it's more about what are the assumptions that we bring with us to these classrooms. But I think here at a liberal arts place like Oglethorpe, I mean, you're kind of expected to debate with your professor sometimes, or discuss, sometimes adamantly with your classmates. So just thinking about, what expectations, what kind of participation are you being graded on? What kind of participation are you supposed to have, and I think these are really, really interesting things to look into more deeply. And there's another one, Marissa, the next. I thought there was one more. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and kind of to this point of maybe the type of classroom I'm more familiar with as you know, a guy from Georgia working at a liberal arts institution. It is kind of this idea that, huh, that could be surprising for some students that, oh, okay, so there's not one right answer, that maybe you're encouraged to have lots of different opinions and perspectives. And as long as you can explain them or describe them or support your opinion, that's what counts. And I think, and I've come up sometimes that that's a very hard concept for some, you know, some students, some people that, you know, if you've been taught in a system where there is one right answer, and I've come up against this myself, like teaching or learning in other places, that there's different systems and there's different standards. And again, it's adjusting, like there's training for all of us, both from the learning and the teaching end, because they're so directly connected. All right, and the next one, Marissa? And I won't go in any huge detail here, but there's a wonderful article by Hofstede, 1986, that talks kind of about these different dimensions of cultural standards and cultural assumptions. And so I always love to just put this one bit, because it's just about how it influences the classroom. And so if you think about like countries, societies, cultures with a small power distance or one with a large power distance, you can kind of start to see a few of these characteristics, right? Like is the instructor the knowledge giver and the student is the knowledge receiver, and like that's the relationship? Or is it kind of, you know, a facilitator role as a teacher, and a discussion and debate oriented role as the students? And you kind of start to see interesting things even at the bottom here, like age comes into play of, you know, small power distance societies, like younger teachers maybe liked more, whereas in a large power distance, like older teachers respected. And even something as simple as you know, age can really come into play here. And you'll notice on the left, kind of halfway down, small power distance students may speak up spontaneously in class versus students only speak up when invited by the teacher, you know. And again, I think it's really important from the instructor end. I've found that, you know, if I put participation in a course as like a major part of my grade, I kind of have to stipulate what that means, because it may not always be assumed that participation means the same thing to me that it does to the students in my class. So it's really fascinating to look at. On the next slide, just a quick plug for anyone that's interested. That article by Hofstede, they've made this really cool tool, and you can find it at the link here, and you can plug in different countries. Maybe you've seen this, maybe not, but it'll kind of compare different countries based on these, I guess, 6 different elements that are discussed in the article: power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. And then it gives a write-up for the comparison. So it's really, really interesting. If you know, if I'm going to or when we used to travel, if I was going somewhere new that maybe I wasn't as familiar, I could look them up here. If I had students or classmates or even a professor from like a country that maybe I didn't know as well, it's always really interesting to plug them in here and just see how they rate on these different metrics. And next one, Marissa. And I guess this will kind of transition us into, you know, what do we do and what can we do to support global learning? Marissa, were you going to take this part? Or? You're on mute, by the way.
Thank you. One of the things that I had said earlier, you know, this idea of global learning is something that's being expanded in higher education and in the field of international education, evolving and growing in really incredible ways, while study abroad participation and international student participation have both been increasing over the years. This emphasis around what we're doing within our classrooms, within any local context. So there's a term that's coming to be used quite often called glocal, right? So how do you connect the global, the things that are happening outside of your own cultural normative group or outside of your own you know, political system or social system, and connecting that to local and the things that you do know, because that's global learning. It's the perspective taking, it's the identifying a complex problem and thinking through how different cultural structures and cultural groups might address that problem and what can be learned from that, how we can engage through others' experiences to inform our own. And so I think what we had hoped to do was really talk a little bit about what we're doing here, but through stories and through some sharing. And so I'll flip it back to Peter to do that.
Yeah, and I love that idea of kind of global. You know, what are all these possibilities we have that it doesn't have to require a plane to go somewhere, you know? And I think, again, I tend to focus on the classroom because that's what I know so well here, but sharing different perspectives, and that can be through the students in our classrooms. This can be from the books that we read. And I know, I think when I first started traveling, like even on that study abroad trip I took, I was just so amazed by like talking to different people that saw the world in a different way. And I built these really great friendships. But then I came back home and realized, okay, what are opportunities I can do this here? And you know, we have Buford Highway right next to Oglethorpe where you can literally meet the whole world, right? And then, you know, you realize, okay, what if there's a place I'm interested that I don't know as much about? And I worked with some Turkish coworkers years ago, and they introduced me to the Orhan Pamuk, the Nobel laureate, and I read this book Snow, and I felt like I really knew Turkey. I've never been there, but it was, you know, and I think there's just all these opportunities to share perspectives in small ways and big ways. And in doing so, we can kind of encourage this idea of perspective taking and openness to new things, because I mean, my background's in applied linguistics, and a lot of studies have shown that, you know, how well do you understand other people? How well do you understand other accents? And more often than not, a lot of studies have shown that attitude affects this much more than any kind of like real studying. It's, you know, how much do you choose to try to understand one another as opposed to just this like skill? And I think that comes into play with whether it's accents or whether it's other cultures, other people. What assumptions do we bring into these interactions, and how open are we to learning from them? And I think, again, more often than not, with a little familiarity, a little openness, and some perspective taking, the intercultural communication just opens up in enormous ways, and that doesn't require like a special degree to do so. You can learn so much just through different types of interactions available to us daily. And most, you know, this last point here kind of related to our core courses here is, you know, we're doing narratives of the self, you know, who are we and how do we fit into the world? And I think by approaching these questions through a global learning lens, you know, I have learned so much about myself just through having like a really interesting friend group over the years from so many places. Is, you know, what, you know, just linguistically, there's all these things that I say that I never realized, like Mike could do something. Oh, that's because I'm from Georgia. Or, you know, saying as a kid, Mr. or Miss first name, you know, like all these really regional things. But then it gets even more into this cultural Southern hospitality, politeness, things that when I lived in Korea, I was trying to make small talk with people at the gas station, and my Korean friend said, like, no, don't do that. That's weird here. You don't talk to strangers in that way. And like, but you really do start to, it puts a mirror on ourselves and how we see the world by processing how other people do. So, I mean, it's a fun and it's a fascinating endeavor. And I think finding as many ways to do this as possible is so rewarding. And actually, and I think this is the slide coming up that I really like. And again, this is just based on my background as language teaching, but a lot of times we use these absolutes like who has the right accent or who speaks the right English or who used the right thing. And I think it's kind of a flawed description, right? Because so many things are just appropriate in certain situations, but maybe not in others. And you can look at something like this as, you know, we determine that this person speaks English correctly and this person doesn't, but really it all depends on where you are. Like even if you look in the kind of sliver on the bottom right half, American Standard English, well, we've just kind of arbitrarily decided that American Standard is some kind of like Midwestern news thing, but who decided that, right? And like, you know, what about, you know, there's African American vernacular English, there's Southern English, there's Appalachian English, like there are all these varieties that are completely appropriate in their context, and they have complicated systems, just like every formal language does. And so I think when we question our assumptions about language, when we question our assumptions about culture, when we question our assumptions about ourselves and the people around us, I think it really invites these types of global learning experiences. So I love this little complicated chart. It's a fun, just visual aid of how complex even something seemingly simple is. Like, what language do you speak? Do you want to take this one, Marissa?
Yeah, which really brings us to the most important, what's next, right? What does this mean? And so, the idea of having this lunch and learn today was really to touch on a few critical things, but to have a couple takeaways. And so I wrote a dissertation all about relationships and friendships. And that's always going to be, it's the way I started thinking about travel in the world and myself and others. And I think it's the way that many people come into the place that they are in terms of global learning. So get to know our international students, ask them a few questions, share insights, be a friend, and connect them to some of the nuances of the cultural norms that you have, because you may have something they've already experienced, or you may be bringing something brand new and can connect around that. I think the way we model respect for cultural differences and similarities, as Peter already reinforced, your attitude really has a massive impact on your ability to connect across the differences and the norms that we have, but also willingness, your respect of others really models for others how to connect, right? And so that mutual respect. I think wherever we can, promoting the value, right? So, in this case, we've all had global travel, we've all pursued relationships or engaged around this global learning concept. But the more we can engage others and make it real for others through promoting that value and what it's done for our lives, or how we've seen, the positive in our life through global learning, the more people are going to be interested. The more people don't have necessarily shy away or are fearful from this idea of something that's different. I think it's also really important to acknowledge that not everybody's going to study abroad. Again, coming from the rural community that I came from, I'm one of a very small number of my friends who ever left the United States. And so to expect that everyone is going to study abroad really undermines and diminishes the opportunities that everyone has for global learning as a human being and as we grow and explore. So we have a wonderful campus and an incredible community, because we have the international students we have, because we have a flourishing study abroad participation. And I think wherever we can, leveraging those students and the experiences they've had to connect with others is a key way that we can continue to support what's happening here at Oglethorpe. So with that, I'm going to make sure that Peter gets credit for his citations and all of the references that we have. I'm going to stop the share, and we actually can stop the recording if,
Okay.
just because I don't want anyone to feel like you're being